Good evening. I remember it well. I've been a youth minister, so somewhat intimidated, trying to work my way through that, figure out what to do. And we had decided to implement a trunk or treat for that Halloween. You know, that's something we do here, kind of morphed into a fall festival here, but that's where you come in, you bring your cars, you kind of circle them up, you open the trunks, and the kids dress up for Halloween. They go around and they get their candy, and it's a fun time to be had. Well, there were some in the congregation, not many, that had a little bit of consternation about this because they believed that Halloween was a pagan holiday that should not be associated with the church in any way, shape, or form, and it certainly shouldn't be a time where little kids dress up like demons and all that kind of stuff. And so we had to kind of work through that, but we were able to put on a good trunk or treat. Everything was going fine, the kids were having fun, and everybody thought, this is a great outreach to the community, and then it happened. One of our deacons decided to dress up like Jason from Friday the 13th. With a chainsaw and everything, he jumped out from behind the bushes and started revving his chainsaw and sent kids scattering in terror. Even some of the adults were horrified. And if that weren't enough, he started chasing some of the kids with the chainsaw. And of course, you had those folks sitting back going, yep, see, I told you, we never should have done this. You know, holidays are kind of the elephant in the room with church, right? We don't really know how to handle them. We don't really know what to do with them. At the very least, we have our disclaimers, right? If we have a Thanksgiving sermon, we talk about how we need to be thankful every day of the year. If we have an Easter sermon, if we preach on the resurrection, the day of Easter, then we talk about how we really need to celebrate the resurrection every Lord's Day, not just one time a year, right? I know of a lady who said that her mother every year would make her an Easter dress. But she didn't want the people in the church to think that it was only for Easter because they celebrated Easter or something like that, so she made her wear it like 2 weeks prior to church as well. It's like with Christmas. You know, we talk about Jesus' birth on the day of Christmas, and we have to put the disclaimer on it that, you know, we believe that Jesus was born not necessarily on December the 25th, and we have to make kind of all sorts of concessions to say we're not trying to celebrate the holiday, we're just talking about Jesus' birth. When I was in Cassville, Missouri, we took a group over to a neighboring church for some sort of conference, and it was around Christmas time, and they had wreaths hung on the door. And there was one gentleman that got so upset, he was ready to get back in the van and go back to Cassville. How dare they put wreaths on the door? That has to mean they believe in celebrating Christmas as a church holiday, and that is uncalled for. And so we don't really know what to do with holidays, do we? We don't know how to handle them. And certainly, I'm not advocating that we need to put up a Christmas tree and we all gather around it and open presents here at church. But neither am I advocating that we need to avoid it altogether. I just want us to think. That's what I always want us to do. And as Christians, many of you have been raised a certain way, in a certain tradition, taught certain things, and some of those things are really good, and it's okay for you to adhere to them. Some of them are not real good, and maybe you need to change them, but you know, we've been raised in certain ways, and we've come to think that some things are absolutely biblical and doctrinal when in actuality they may not be. It's kind of like higher math. You take a higher math class in high school or college, and you have to show your work. Maybe you come to the right conclusion, but if you didn't show your work, you're probably not going to get a good grade. I just want us to show our work. Because there are some things that we have come to, some conclusions we've reached in the church that I'm not saying are bad. But our explanation for them and the reasoning for them maybe don't hold water. So let's show our work. And let's bring this elephant in the room out. Let's expose it. And let's try to figure out what it is and where we should stand on holidays and special days. I think we need some clarity here. Like I said, I'm not advocating that we celebrate Christmas as a religious church holiday. But at the same time, I don't think we're condemnable if we have wreaths on the door. And I just want us to think about some things. There are many Christians who are very unreasonable when it comes to this topic. Like for Halloween, for instance. They think it's a demonic holiday, that it's a holiday that has pagan roots, which I would suggest they go back and do a little reading on the history of Halloween. But there are folks who believe that Halloween is a satanic holiday, and yet they take their wife out for dinner on Valentine's Day. A holiday that definitely has pagan roots. What about birthdays? Do you celebrate your birthday? There are some who stand vehemently opposed to Halloween and celebrating Halloween, but they celebrate birthdays. You realize those have pagan roots? The celebration of birthdays has pagan roots. You know, there are some who are so against the commercialization of Christmas, and yet they max out their credit cards. They're not consistent there. There are some folks who denounce certain practices in our world, and yet they're very inconsistent in the way that they carry out other things. For instance, do we put flowers on the graves of our dead loved ones? I mean, many of us do that, right? But because we do that, does that mean that we're exactly like the Hindus who engage in the practice of putting food on the graves of their loved ones? If your young boy was circumcised when he was an infant, does that mean that he's automatically Jewish? And what about our days of the week? Do you realize that our days of the week are named after pagan what's the word I'm looking for? Mythological. Right, thank you. They're named after mythological gods. I mean, Thursday, for instance, it literally means Thor's day, the mythological character Thor. And yet we talk about days of the week all the time. We just want to have some consistency here. Let's think. Let's show our work when it comes to this kind of thing. Here's what we need to get straight from the very beginning. Can we all admit that there are certain customs and practices that have occurred through the years that have evolved over time? Can we not say that? Can we not say that there are certain, maybe even holidays, that have changed in the way that they're practiced? And just because they may have even had a pagan root somewhere down the line, does that mean that we can't celebrate them today, or that it's different, that it's any different today? For instance, I mean, my children have never once thought that Halloween was a pagan holiday and that they were dressing up to go around door to door and get candy because it was satanic. My kids have never thought that. And I would only confuse them if I told them that. They just saw it as a fun day to dress up. And I think we can go too far with anything, but hopefully you see my point. Things evolve over time when it comes to certain practices or holidays or traditions. Certain practices or customs change, and when they do, we can't hold other people to a standard that was way back in older times. We can't bind that on them. And actually, the Bible has something to say about this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, here's what Paul has to say. He says, "Now concerning things sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. If anyone supposes that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him. Therefore, concerning the eating of things sacrificed to idols, we know that there is no such thing as an idol in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things and we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through Him. However, not all men have this knowledge, but some, being accustomed to the idol until now, eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. But food will not commend us to God. We are neither the worse if we do not eat, nor the better if we do eat. But take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone sees you who have knowledge dining in an idol's temple, will not his conscience, if he is weak, be strengthened to eat things sacrificed to idols? For through your knowledge, he who is weak is ruined, the brother for whose sake Christ died. And so, by sinning against the brethren and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause my brother to stumble." Now, what we glean from this passage is the practice of eating meat sacrificed to idols was a hot-button topic in this day and time. And so that's why Paul is approaching it. And Paul is talking about this sacrifice that is made to an idol, and after it is sacrificed to this idol, what is left, the leftover portions, were sold in the market for anyone else to consume. And Paul says this, he says, "An idol is nothing." An idol has no power. We know that as Christians. We know that it is nothing, that there is no idol that can do anything. It's imaginary. It's absolutely powerless and can add nothing to one's life. For the person who knows this, his conscience is not offended in any way. I mean, why would it be? He's well aware of the fact that the meat he's eating is simply meat. It doesn't matter if it used to be sacrificed to an idol or if some pagan, reserved it for an idol. That doesn't matter. It's still meat. Meat doesn't change its consistency based on what somebody offers to an idol. So it's okay. But Paul recognizes the fact that everyone doesn't feel this way. That there are some people who are weak in their faith who have not able to come to making that distinction yet. And so they have a problem with it. They have a problem eating this meat that has previously been sacrificed by some pagan to an idol. They have problems digesting that, and they won't eat it. And Paul says that's okay too. And he says, if you've gathered with folks such as this, simply refrain from eating the meat, lest your conscience be wounded. It's not worth it, he says. Your love for your brother should mean more to you than meat. Paul is appealing to love. Love your brother. That's more important than what you eat. Even if you have the freedom to eat meat that is sacrificed to an idol, don't exercise that freedom. Just keep the peace. A similar scenario would be me growing up in the Catholic Church. When you would walk in for Mass, you would dip your hand in the holy water, you'd make the sign of the cross. What if, before they put that holy water in the basin there, I was to drink some of it? I could drink some of that. It wouldn't hurt me a bit. Because the water's consistency is not changed in any way, shape, or form by the priest blessing it. Right? I could drink that holy water. It would do nothing to me. It wouldn't affect my conscience now because I know better. But there are some in my family it would bother them. To the point that they would almost think it's condemnable, right? They would have a hard time watching me do something like that. And in fact, maybe come down on me pretty hard. And so Paul is saying, look, you have certain rights and freedoms, but you don't have to exercise those rights or freedoms. If it's going to bother the weaker brother, then just move on from it. Understand, we're not talking about doctrinal matters here, okay? Some people like to take 1 Corinthians chapter 8 or Romans chapter 14 and apply it to certain doctrinal matters and say, well, it's all the same thing, and it's not. Meat's not a doctrinal matter. Meat sacrificed to an idol is just that. There's nothing there other than just a scrupulous matter. But here's something else we have to understand. And that is that the weaker brother cannot use the weakness of his faith as an excuse forever. Because I know sometimes in the church, we allow the weaker brother argument to always win. The goal is not to stay the weaker brother. The goal is to mature. And once you reach greater maturity, you can make the distinction that Paul is talking about here. But you can't stay a weaker brother all along because you don't want to change. That's the point. But what does all this mean as it pertains to Christians and holidays? Well, it means that in the case of 1 Corinthians chapter 8, that some can engage in such holidays with a clear conscience. I mean, for instance, I have no problem letting my children dress up for Halloween and going house to house and gaining candy. I don't perceive it as pagan or satanic, and my children don't either. However, I recognize that some people do. And if they think that way, then that's okay. I don't agree with them, but I don't have to be right. I don't have to bind, and in fact, I shouldn't bind my beliefs upon them. But in the same way, they can't bind their beliefs on me either. It's a scrupulous matter, so they can't take their conviction and bind it on me. So when someone as a Christian says, well, you shouldn't be celebrating Halloween, they come down hard on an individual, that's wrong. Can't do that. Nor can I bind my conviction on them that it's okay. That's what Paul's talking about here in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. He also approaches the subject in Romans chapter 14, where he points out that any group of Christians, where there's any group of Christians, there are going to be varying degrees of knowledge and maturity. You have to recognize that. And you have to be able to say, okay, my rights may not win out here. And he says, now accept the one who is weak in faith, but not for the purpose of passing judgment on his opinions. One person has faith that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats vegetables only. The one who eats is not to regard with contempt the one who does not eat, and the one who does not eat is not to judge the one who eats, for God has accepted him. Who are you to judge the servant of another? to his own master, he stands or falls, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. One person regards one day above another. Another regards every day alike. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it for the Lord, and he who eats does so for the Lord, for he gives thanks to God. And he who eats not for the Lord, he does not eat, and gives thanks to God. For not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord, or if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the dead and the living. Paul's greatest concern was unity. He wanted that above all else. And that should be our greatest concern as well. Some, out of conviction, choose not to eat certain meats. Okay, that's fine. Some, out of conviction, choose to not celebrate certain days. Others, out of conviction, choose to celebrate other days. All that's okay. Just don't be binding it on one another. Don't sit there and say you have to do this or you're condemned to hell. Don't draw lines in the sand that God hasn't drawn. Don't condemn somebody that God has accepted. And you may have to give up your rights. You may have to say, you know what, in this matter, it's not that important. I want to keep the peace and I want to have unity, so therefore I'm going to set it aside. Notice now 1 Corinthians 10, beginning of verse 23. Paul writes, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. Eat anything that is sold in the market, in the meat market, without asking questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. If one of the believers invites you and you want to go, eat anything that is set before you without asking questions for conscience sake. But if anyone says to you, this meat is sacrificed to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for conscience sake. I mean, not for your own conscience, but the other man's. For why is my freedom judged by another's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that for which I gave thanks? Whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do all for the glory of God. Give no offense either to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, so that they may be saved. Here again, Paul's just saying, think about this for a minute. Just think. You know, it's silly to say, you've got to do this, you've got to eat this meat, or you're condemned. Or it's silly to say, if you eat this meat, then you're condemned. Paul is wanting unity here, and he's saying that you're not really honoring an idol by eating meat that was once been sacrificed to an idol. The meat has lost its pagan significance. The key to all of it is verses 23 and 24. That sets the tone. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. In other words, be able to set it aside if need be because of your present company. You know, if someone is weaker in the faith and they haven't reached a point where they can make that distinction, that's okay. You don't have to be right here. No one has to be right. No one has to be wrong. Just set it aside for a moment. It's not worth it. You know, your liberty or getting what you want is not more important than unity. Now, how do we apply all this to holidays? If I want to celebrate Halloween with my kids, I can do that. I can do that. The Bible does not condemn me for doing that. If I want to celebrate Christmas with my family, if I want to put up a tree and open presents, I can do that. If I want to hunt Easter eggs with my kids, then I can do that. And you can tell me I'm wrong and you can condemn me, but you would be wrong. Just as I would be wrong to say you shouldn't do that or you should do that. Either way, I can't point the finger and say, absolutely, this is what you have to do or this is something that you can't do. If my Christian brother or sister feels that Halloween or Christmas or Easter should be avoided at all costs, they have the right to think that way. But they're wrong to project that on me or another brother or sister that feels differently. They're wrong to condemn for that, and vice versa. You know, so many times I've run into Christians who feel very strongly about, Christmas or, Easter, and they have some very real opinions on that. And a lot of it comes from the way they were raised, kind of the home that they were brought up in. A lot of times they may cite reasons, like that they're pagan or that, that December 25th actually wasn't the day of Christ's birth, whatever it may be. We don't have to come to blows. This is not a doctrinal matter. Now, when it comes to celebration within the church, that's a little bit different. I mean, what we see in the New Testament church is we don't see them celebrating, a Christmas as the day of Christ's birth. Now, does that mean that the church is condemned if we have a Christmas tree or if we have wreaths on the door or something like that? No, that's not what that means. But don't you think there's a middle ground somewhere? Because what we do in the church so often is we swing the pendulum to one extreme or the other, and we see the truth as we pass by it. There's always some middle ground that we can rest on that we usually just fly by because we want to take an extreme position. I mean, there's some middle ground here. Just because I believe that Christmas is a time that we can focus in on Jesus' birth, that doesn't mean that I believe in celebrating it as a church holiday. Just because we sing Silent Night at worship next Sunday morning, if we were to do that, that doesn't mean that we're celebrating Christmas as a church holiday. I mean, we don't sing those songs any other time of the year. Why not? They're biblical. We should be able to sing any song that's biblical. I can sing Joy to the World next Sunday morning as a church family, and that doesn't mean that I'm believing that Jesus was actually born on December 25th, and I want to celebrate it as a church holiday, and therefore I'm somehow unconsciously drawn into this whole thing, and I'm condemned. There's a middle ground here, right? Here's what I'm going to do, and you can agree or disagree with me, that's okay. I'm going to redeem these holidays. What I mean by that is if our world is at least going to take one day out of the year to pause and consider Christ's birth, I'm going to redeem that and I'm going to use that in every opportunity I can. I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity to help people to understand that Christmas is more than presents, it's more than tinsel, it's more than shiny ornaments, that it is about Christ's birth. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to debate with them for hours whether he was really born on December 25th. I'm going to talk to them about what his birth means to us, to the entire world. And when it comes to Easter, I'm going to redeem that holiday. I'm going to redeem it. I'm going to use that time to talk about the resurrection. Why would I avoid the two greatest events in history ever? Why would I ever avoid them? Much less on days when people are coming to visit and you have these CEO people. You know what CEO people are? Christmas and Easter only. They come to church Christmas and Easter only. Why would I avoid it? Why would I ever avoid it? But certainly, why would I avoid it on those days? And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. Redeem those holidays. If our world, who seems to be very anti-Christian nowadays, if they're going to take 1 or 2 days a year to pause and reflect on Jesus' birth or resurrection, I want to help them understand that it's more than just tinsel or Cadbury eggs, that there's more to it than that these are the two greatest events in the history of the world, and what they mean to you, what they mean for me. And again, there's some middle ground here. I mean, I do think there is a distinction to be made. It bothers me when you see churches nowadays incorporating Lent and incorporating, certain like Palm Sunday and Ash Wednesday. That bothers me because you don't see the church doing that. And so if I don't see the first church doing those kind of things and celebrating those kind of holy days, then I feel they're unwarranted, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. But surely we can understand there's some middle ground here. I mean, I would say 100% of us, at least 99.9% of us, are going to go home after church Sunday and we're going to celebrate Christmas. And then we come to church and we can't even talk about it. Don't sing any church songs that are even remotely associated with Christmas. There used to be a time where you couldn't even say Merry Christmas in some churches. Nowadays, with the backlash of culture, we seem to be doing a 180 on that and being more proud of that, right? Folks, let's get the elephant in the room out there and understand that there is some middle ground here. That it's okay for us to celebrate the birth of Jesus. It's even okay for us to celebrate it on December the 25th as a family, even to sing about it in the church. That doesn't mean that we believe he was born on the 25th or that we're celebrating it as a church holiday. Easter is a little more biblical though even, isn't it? Certainly we need to be talking about the resurrection. And yes, we need to do it every Sunday, but it's okay to talk about it on Easter Sunday as well. I mean, we have so many people in our world that need to understand the two greatest events in our history. Why would we avoid those anytime, especially on those 2 days? So I invite you to do the same and to redeem those holidays. And if our culture is going to take a little bit of time out to pause and to consider it, well, let's help them to understand the true meaning of those things, right? I mean, Christmas nowadays is all about flying reindeer and commercialization and all that. I want them to understand what it means that Christ was born. And then on Easter, I want them to mean that it's more than just hiding and hunting eggs. The greatest event in our history is that our God, our Jesus, rose from the dead and showed victory over sin and death. You know, I think so often what we do is we shoot ourselves in the foot. You know, we try so hard to be conservative and we try so hard to be biblical. And in some ways, we leave people confused. And there's a lot of people out there that are asking questions. There's a lot of people that look at the hurt and the fracture that's going on in the world around us, and now more than ever, they need hope. They don't necessarily need us telling them why December 25th is not the exact day that Jesus was born. They don't necessarily need us telling them that Halloween is a pagan holiday and I can't believe you're letting your kids dress up like that. They don't necessarily need us talking to them about how we celebrate the resurrection every Sunday and how Easter is a commercialized holiday. What they need is an understanding of what the birth and resurrection of Jesus actually means to us and to the sinner, right? Why would we ever avoid that? And why would we make it about something other than that? Our world's doing that already. We need to bring them back into focus. So let's redeem those days. I hope this has helped. I appreciate the question. I hope it's been balanced. I hope that it brings some sort of clarity to the issue. And I hope that you understand that I didn't preach this lesson tonight to set ourselves up for some magnificent Christmas service next Sunday where we're going to have decorated trees and Jake's going to be preaching in a Santa outfit. That's not what I was advocating, okay? You know me enough to know that I want to be biblically based. I want to present the truth of God's Word in a way that is easy to grasp and to process. And I want us to think. Let's just think. And let's find the balance here, and let's understand that some things that maybe we've written off, and some things that maybe we've kicked to the side, maybe they're not that bad, and maybe it's okay to talk about them, and maybe even in some cases to do them. So hopefully it's helped. If we can help you tonight in some other way, if you need the prayers and support of this church family, if you're not a child of God and you're ready to put on Christ in baptism, then we want to do that tonight, certainly. But as we say every week, don't leave here without being right with God. And when you do leave here, go out and change the world. Come now as we stand and as we sing.